I look forward to this opportunity. As Felice said, I'm the research director at PPIC, and so the cat herding is in the job description. What is the great benefit is that I work with a group of very smart people, and so when I said I was agreed to do this, I knew I could go to those smart people and say, give me stuff. And so this topic is something that we care about a lot. We work a lot on the sort of mobility, income inequality, social network side, social safety net side, and then we also work a lot on the education side. We tend to divide the world between K-12 and higher ed for a variety of reasons, but obviously there's great overlap, and so what I'm going to try to do is pull together some of those threads for you in a very cleverly entitled Good, Bad, and Unknown. It is not ugly, but we just don't know. So Jessica sent these 3 questions that could be addressed and didn't sort of suggest I try to sort of do it all, but I'm very ambitious. And so what I'm going to try to do is touch on some of the programs and really some recent policy changes that have been made, and then sort of flip that into what that can or could do with regard to issues of inequality and focusing very specifically on California. And as someone who spent a lot of time in the classroom, I would love to think that everyone paid attention, as much attention to me at the end of my lectures as they did at the beginning, but I just am a realist. And so I have a habit of giving you the bottom line right away, which is that if you're interested in issues of inequality, I would really emphasize that education is one of the tools, but it's a long-run tool, right? You have poor people today, education, all perfect, operating on all cylinders, is not going to address the immediate problem. We are looking at it, if not long-run, even generationally. With that, the good news is that some recent changes that have been made in K-12, I think are promising. We are in a funny place with regard to higher education. I described the policy making of it as stagnant. And this unknown is sort of, will we sort of implement those good policy decisions that were made in K-12 well? And are we going to go and kind of wade into the higher ed issues that I think we really have to wade into? If we do those two things, I think then we can use this nice big lever that we have called education.
Can I just ask you if you're assuming Common Core is what you're talking about here?
Yes, it is.
Okay, good. Oh,
So,
there it is. Okay.
I'm going to start with the assumption that we agree there's an achievement gap. It's become vogue to call that an opportunity gap. If you want, I can tell you that that's a dumb way to describe it. The dean of my own school of education is adamant that it's an opportunity gap. Opportunity is great, but we can put people at the start line. It doesn't mean that they will get to the finish line, and to me that's achievement. So I will be incorrect and refer to it as an achievement gap. If you want to take a look at sort of where California stacks up, this nationsreportcard.gov has a neat map. You can look at whether or not the gaps have closed. You can look at what's happened in other states. They use something called the NAEP scores, which are a national test that we take a sample of students in California that take, but it gives you a way in which you can not only look at California relative to other states, but also internationally. It's the best thermometer I've seen. It does 4th and 8th grade testing, and it's in math and ELA, so it's a very classic thing. And what you find is no change in California. I mean, there's been some improvement, but not significant enough. So I'll start with that assumption. What I'm going to focus on is Common Core. I apologize for acronyms, and my communications people would smash me right now if they had seen these slides in advance. I've got an acronym right up front, but the LCFF is the new funding formula. The LCAP is the new accountability program. Those came in 2013, and then we'll talk about sort of the role that higher ed at least is playing, or what's happened to date and where it could go. So, California K-12 is there's been big policy decisions that have been made, and they have a common theme in them. Both of them are essentially sort of pushing a lot of decision making down. We've gone through roughly, going back from the 1980s, 30 years of taking decision making into Sacramento. The pendulum's now swinging back in the other direction, and we're starting to say, wait a second, people at the district level, at the local level might know something about this, might know something about their problems, and we're going to try to, in a sense, give them the tools for that. The Common Core state standards, I would really encourage, if you haven't, and we'll talk about them a little bit, but they are standards, they aren't curricula. That is also a decision that can be made at the district level. And so those two decisions have been made. We're now in the process of implementing them. For a lot of people, the sort of boring, mundane part of public policy, for nerds like me, the part that really makes the difference in a lot of cases. So here's my audience participation question. When did California adopt the Common Core? Any guesses?
2 years ago.
2 years ago?
Not this school year, but the one before.
No,
It's
when
2 years
Bush,
ago?
Year and a half.
Wasn't it when Bush was?
No, that's No Child Left Behind, so that'll go back to 2001.
But I'm wondering if it's a trick question they haven't adopted yet.
Nope,
Yeah.
nope, they've adopted it.
Okay, so it's a year and a half.
2010.
Yeah, they
How long ago?
Fine.
We didn't really start doing anything about it until a year and a half ago.
Okay, that's.
And I will flag that as a problem, but we're doing it now. Common Core, if for those of you in less for this room and for probably more broader general audience, is not a Obama core. It is not a federal curricula. The National Governors Association and something called the Chief State Schools Officers, which is sort of Tom Torlix and all of his buddies, the folks that are sort of the head of schools in each state, were the ones that brought this together. They had a lot of support from third-party folks, particularly there's a good article in the Washington Post on the role that the Gates Foundation played in all of this. But basically it was to push for the development of a curriculum that was sort of, that you could norm nationally relative to other countries, but it was a sort of state option of whether or not to adopt it. At the peak, 44 and a half states adopted the Common Core. Minnesota only took the English language arts, not the math. And now we're in this period of some states are saying no, Indiana, Florida's toying with it, Oklahoma, I believe, and stuff. So there's some flux in my 44 number.
Isn't Duncan endorsing?
Oh yeah, Arnie is way behind this. I mean, this is very much in the sense of what he thinks should be done. But he has used sort of carrots for states to adopt it. But to give you some example, Texas has not adopted the
Oh,
Common
big
Core.
surprise.
And so I mean, you don't lose anything by not, right? I mean, Texas did not walk away from billions of dollars by not adopting the Common Core. So this, there is an ideological argument of this is a states' rights issue. I'm a political scientist. I just don't get it. As an aside, it puts George Bush, Freudian slip. That other one, yeah, Jeb Bush, in a very interesting position because I watched him very strongly defend this, and I give him great credit for it, and he does it in front of any audience. But the far right Republicans say that this is a bad idea. I'm going to go from the idea that, and I believe this, that it's a good idea. And the reason is that the intent at least, and it was not sort of pulled out of thin air, but it was to try to come up with standards that would be in just English and math, please note, but would lead to better prepared graduates, both for going to college as well as for going to the workforce. Though by doing that, reaches way down into the classroom, right? In fact, Mike Kirst has a great little piece, video I think that he's got someplace that refers to the Common Core changes everything, and it really does. What it's done is it's changed how you think about learning and teaching, which is a huge challenge. It's a different way in which teachers had been prepared, many of them going into this. It has taken the big thick book and reduced the content. Math books used to be like this, and Common Core math books, if they were to be produced and printed out, would be like that. The number of items that they're going to address in a given year are fewer, and the idea is that the student will have greater mastery of it and understand how it works. They also scaffold it so that things you learn in first grade go into second grade, go into third grade, go into fourth grade, on up, so that makes sense. And then you link across subjects. So things you can talk about in math, you can bring into your English language arts, and then potentially into social science and sciences and such. That is the concept behind it. Is as crazy, is as wild. For those of you familiar with the KIPP schools have approached teaching this way from day one. This is not just some bizarre three pointy-headed academics sitting there or anything. Whether we pull this off is a whole nother question, but conceptually, I haven't seen anyone be able to sort of take it apart in that respect.
Has this, at this juncture, impacted the textbooks yet?
Yes, in fact, with a great question. Give me just a second and I'll sort of give you a before and after. The other piece with this is the tests, and we'll come back to those, but I mean, if you're gonna change what it is we expect kids to learn, we have to have a way of assessing that.
But isn't that a problem, because Texas isn't on board? Texas has the most effect of any state on the textbooks, because they buy at a statewide level, and therefore a lot of the publishers basically work around what Texas standards. So that's a problem.
And now Texas
California
stands,
is not.
California used to do that too. So the difference there on the textbook side is somebody put it, California lost its most favored nation status. Because their standards are the same as these other 40-some states, give or take now. What it does mean is that when the state of New York paid people to develop materials for the Common Core in New York and said, police, I want you to develop this, you say, yes, I will, here's thousands of dollars to do that, you say, great, that's my cap. Oh, one thing, no copyright, open source. Berkeley School District, I know, was using those materials that were developed in New York. Why? Because they're common and they were free.
You mean the math program?
I just know that.
Yeah, I'm a Berkeley Unified
Yeah.
teacher.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
there's a math program, it's open source, it's on the internet.
And
The kids hate it, the teachers hate it.
Yep.
It's-
and actually, is it vox.com, vox.com has a neat 3-minute thing on why math is weird. And then what's the theory behind it. It's a great little video on it.
That was probably an overgeneralization.
No, but I mean,
It's a big change.
it's a huge challenge, there's
Yeah.
no doubt. And they weren't prepared, to be fair, they weren't taught that way. I mean, they themselves weren't prepared
Right.
to teach that way either.
And
so
we had
it's-
to roll it out K-5, so the fifth graders had none of the preparation.
And so-
For the new way of thinking about math, and they arrive at fifth grade with having been taught a whole
Yeah.
different way, and then having to know these other concepts that they were supposed to have been learning for 5 years
Right.
before.
and that's my point about the 2010 adoption, where we could have been preparing folks
Right.
and we chose not to.
Patrick, if you don't mind, I'd like to maybe have people hold their questions, take a note, take a note.
Sure.
And so you'll have a better flow, and some people obviously know this a lot more than others, so I'd kind of like to
Yeah.
hear your whole,
The spiel.
the whole spiel.
The tests that go with this, California has adopted something called the Smarter Balance test. You'll hear them referred to by that. You'll hear them referred to as CBAC. There was 2 consortiums, one Smarter Balance, the other PARC. For what it's worth, and I know nothing about testing, but I've kind of liked the Smarter Balance approach a little bit better because their pitch or their argument was that they were going to take advantage of this difference in the way in which kids are supposed to learn. And they were going to make them what they call computer adaptive, so that if the child sitting at the computer is doing well on some answers, they will give them harder answers. If the child is not doing well, they will give them easier answers, trying to figure out where they are and make decisions based on some algorithms so that they spend less time taking the test, and yet they can sort of gauge where they're at. We went through what I call no-stakes testing last fall or last spring. We are in the midst of the current first round of those tests as we speak, actually. So here's my before and after. So before California had standards, they were well thought of. I mean, this was not, California was not in one of the states that was sort of like, oh my gosh, we've got the bar set so low that we need to do something about it. I mean, if you looked at sort of proficiency in California relative to, say, Alabama looked like stars. Every kid was clearing the bar. Well, Alabama had set the bar 2 inches off the floor. They now have the Common Core standards, and it's going to be the same standards that we're going to look at for both states. The Common Core, though, is English language, arts, and math. We've adopted the science standards of our own choosing, us being California. So that's the starting point. The tests have gone from what we used to call the STAR tests, which were the fill in the bubbles with paper and pencil. My line is there. If you've got a number 2 pencil, hopefully that will become an heirloom at some point. The CBAC tests, of course, are done in these computers, but it's the same idea, grades 3 through 8 and 11, not much change there. And then we've got this unique market for texts and materials that, in theory, could come from anywhere. You could find a single district in Rochester, Minnesota that does some nice stuff, and you could say, hey, let's use that instead. California's implementation has been slow. We pumped in $1.25 billion in 2013, another $1 billion last year to be used as seen fit. Susan Bonilla has introduced a bill for another $1 billion this year. What they're doing with that money is not exactly clear. Our reports are a lot into professional development for teachers. That probably makes sense. But this is where I would say that we're behind. I like to point to Tennessee, one of those states that we don't always think of as being out on the forefront of education. But they had a plan that started in 2011. They brought in some very talented teachers. They used a train the teacher model. They had thousands of teachers who had started with the introduction to this by 2012. And then they started implementing in 2013 with refreshers and stuff. We have not had that same top-down leadership and left a lot up to the districts. And I used to sort of at this point in the talk say there's a great opportunity for the Department of Education to step into this void, but it's that train's left. I don't look to the department to step into the void at this point. Districts have been, in a sense, left on their own, and we have a pretty uneven implementation, at least as of fall of 2013 when folks went out and surveyed. In some districts you could have, about 60% said, yeah, we've talked to all the teachers and at least introduced them. Fall of 2013, remember this is leading up, this is the fall that the first Common Core is. We had 17%, say 1/4 of the school districts who said, yeah, a few of the teachers, or none at all. So that was a little disturbing. Unlike some other states, and if you want to get into the politics of this, the public, when you ask them about the Common Core, they don't necessarily profess much complete knowledge or opinions about it. If you sort of tell them what it's about or supposed to do, this question I don't like tremendously well, but it was on a survey we used last year. But in general, what we see in California is pretty broad support. I wish I could bring in the numbers, but they're going to be released on Thursday. Just watch PPIC. We've got another education poll that I'll spoiler alert, pretty much the same thing. There's support for the Common Core in California. Why is that interesting? Because we've got some other places where there's a political push against it. There is not yet. So what's the role of this in terms of the question that you guys are working at? I would argue that if we do this right, the way in which it's teaching, the way in which it's preparing students, not just about content, but how to think and learn, will lead them better prepared. And that goes across all, however you want to think about it. Poor kids, wealthy kids, race, ethnicity, etc. That there is this opportunity to improve. Along the way, we might get more of an investment in particularly the school districts that haven't had it in technology. I don't see that as a bad thing. It's a backdoor way of doing it, but we could have that happen. And there's a little bit of a question mark, and again, you have a political scientist with you that wonders if there won't be something of a backlash once the first set of test scores come out. Why? Because they will show up lower. They're set up that way. The way they put the cut scores were said this is a harder test. So now here's the kicker. This is all happening while we're changing a whole bunch of other things. So if you don't think school superintendent district administration is one of the hardest jobs in the world, and I think it is, we made it really, really hard for this next little spin. So in 2013, we did something called this new funding formula. Basically, what used to happen is that we divided up money from Sacramento into, depending on how you count it, I think my number was 57 different little grants, and they went out and they said, this is how much you have to spend on textbooks, this is how much you have to spend on professional development, this is how much you have to spend on whatever. And if you were a business officer, you kept track of all those dollars. And you had to make sure you couldn't spend from one for the other. What we did is we said, that's not sensible, and I'll take some claim or blame for this. PPIC was pushing for something of a different formula that would simplify it. So now what happens is that money goes out based on basically a base level plus additional money for what are defined as high need students, those being low income, which are measured by the free lunch program, English learners for foster kids. And if you have more of those, and there's it's more complicated, a little bit more complicated than that, but basically you get more money per kid. With that is that we have these accountability plans that in theory will be saying how are you spending the money and how are you making sure that those kids do better. And there's this collaborative, and I'm skipping that. So there's the three categories. Statewide, we've got about 63% of the kids in our schools, K-12 schools, that fall into those categories. And if you look at it, California has more of these, what I'm going to refer to as high needs or needy students relative to the rest of the nation. Not a huge surprise if you think about it.
Is that related to population? Or
Yeah.
percent?
Are those percentages?
Percentages of our student bodies.
And why
In
is
the
it,
public school or private school?
Public.
And why is that not a big surprise when
can
we
we,
think about
can we,
Georgia?
we'll get into the discussion.
Immigration. One word. There's more, but. So here's a question that we're asking at PPIC, which is that additional funding is going to the districts, and will it reach the kids that it's intended to? Intellectually, it makes a lot of sense. I'm not for equal funding for students. I think that's a dumb idea. Why? Because the kids that need more help need more money. And so we should invest more in it. That's the idea behind locally controlled funding. So if you say, well, we should give every student the same amount, if we're looking to close this achievement gap, if we're looking to address inequality, we actually need to invest more in those students. We ask this question of, well, in a district like Fresno, where it is 90% high need students and they're spread throughout the district, chances are the money's coming into the district, they're going to spend it. If nothing else, will they be spending it wisely? We aren't asking those questions yet. We can't. It's way too early. But will it get to those students? We feel pretty confident that it will. But some analysis that was done by my colleagues found that there's these pockets of what we call high need students in districts that overall are low need. And that's a flag for us going forward, right? That we'll want to make sure that in those districts that we don't sort of lose track of where those dollars go. And to give you some idea, you have Glenwood Elementary, which is 90% high needs students, but the district itself is about a quarter high needs. So they got some extra money for the district, but there's no requirement that it goes to Glenwood Elementary. And there's tens of thousands of students who fall into this in a high needs school, but not a high needs district. So we issued a report and we flagged that. Unfortunately, some outlets that don't read press releases, they've stopped reading reports. I don't expect them to read reports, but they don't even read the press releases anymore. PPIC report finds kids not getting money. No, we don't know that yet. We're saying that they might, but Mike Kurse was calling me and he was mad. I said, Mike, I can't control what reporters say. He's the president of the State Board of Education, and so he's like, yes, but he wrote an op-ed to the Sacramento Bee to say that isn't it. Anyway, where are these pockets? You see them down south, Orange County being the largest number, and then up and around the Bay Area counties. These are kind of these problems. So when I say if these new changes are implemented well, this is one of the things that I would keep an eye on, is whether or not the money's getting to those students. And then there's a whole other set of questions of whether or not it's going to make a difference. So this is the this is the kind of bringing it together in terms of whether or not these decisions or these policies will make a difference. The formula sends more money to the districts with high need students. In theory, the districts are able to figure out what's the best way to tackle that, and I totally endorse that. They have what is an issue in Berkeley School District may be different from what they need to invest in San Francisco, may be different than what they need in Imperial County. I feel pretty confident that they're in a better position than trying to write that one-size-fits-all into law. Therefore, we will get student outcomes to improve. And that therefore, of course, is the sort of theory behind this. I have a friend, Paul Hill, who writes about a lot of ed reform stuff, and he refers to these as kind of zones of wishful thinking. We need some other things to happen for it, but in theory, that's what's supposed to. But right now, the way in which we're checking on it is a bit vague, and that's an understatement. I'm not filled with confidence on that, and we can go into this sort of detail in terms of what my concerns are. But right now, it's pretty wide open how a district can account for achievement progress against these 8 priorities. So, given all that wonderful news, in theory, if we get those things right and we get more prepared students, we've got a state's economy that needs more graduates. Some other PPIC work says that by 2025 we'll need 1 million more bachelor's degrees than we have. We'll need a 500,000 more graduates with some college, as we call it, so that could be a community college associate degree or certificates, but some completion there. And if we're going to make it there, we can't keep with the same group of folks that we've had going into the system, right? We're going to have to change because our population is changing. It's going to have to become more diverse, and we're going to have to reach into families that don't have a tradition of going to college. My guess is, if I were to take a show of hands, if the folks in this room either have degrees themselves or their children have degrees. The best determinant, of course, of whether or not your children will get a degree is whether or not you have a degree. We're going to have to, again, in California, are going to have to switch that. The other option is we can import them. And when I say import, please note, I'm talking either overseas or from other states. We could do that, and I think we are doing that. We are attracting smart, talented people from around the world, in part because we aren't producing enough ourselves. So there's a good driver there. Over time, we're making progress. We are becoming more diverse in terms of the college students in California. Certainly in the last 50 years, but even more recently than that, in the last 10 to 12. That's a good thing.
Wait, we
Oh,
will slow
sorry.
down that one. Just on 30, what we are now.
Interesting.
So it's our college going population is looking more like California. But it's not necessarily there yet. And I can't remember if I've got it in here. Part of the reason is that it's those students are in our public schools, our public universities. And it's in part a commentary on the size of our public colleges and universities. It's become somewhat vogue as well to say we really, you don't necessarily need a college degree, the college degree doesn't pay off or whatever and all that. I will politely respond, horse hockey or whatever. This idea that, I'll have a competition and I'll find some entrepreneurs and just like I did, that's like finding a great NBA player. It's possible, and that individual who's very talented will do well. I just don't know what the counterfactual is. You take that student and put them in a computer science program at Stanford, my guess is they're going to do pretty well too. Overall, we know that unemployment is lower. This last recession was much kinder to people with bachelor's degrees than those without. And you make more money. And that has always been the case, and it's getting wider. So that, what I call the college premium. So the orangish line is high school. That sort of brownish line above it is some college, so that's not a BA. And the blue line is the brown line is the bachelor's degree, and the blue line is graduate school.
What's the right axis?
What's that?
Is the right axis hourly wage or
Hourly wage, yeah.
Per hour.
$6.10 an hour? That's kind of below the minimum wage.
Adjusted, they're in some constant dollars, probably 2,000. And that doesn't matter what you major in. You will do better. That bottom little sort of bar, so that gives you the spread, they're called a box and whiskers graph. Again, our communications folks hate it, but they weren't controlling me. So the high school is kind of the spread you get there. And then we took a look at sort of, yes, engineering pays really well. Computer science pays really well. If you have, heaven forbid, just a liberal arts degree, social science, political science, whatever, you are going to make more money. It will matter which degree, how much you make, but you're going to make more money than if you'd gone to high school.
Education doesn't look so good.
Yeah.
Doesn't speak well to lawyers.
Yeah. And that's, yes, says the teacher and the parent of a teacher. And our public schools are doing public universities make a lot of this possible, and unlike some states, if for those of you who are refugees from the Midwest and the East, we just don't have the private schools, in part because our public schools are big and cheap, and that's still the case, and there's a market piece there. But that's sort of across the board. And we're doing better at completion, a little bit of a tip up at the end of that, so that's good, and that goes across race and ethnicity. So this idea that we want to produce more folks from sort of non-traditional or underrepresented groups is happening, but not at an incredibly fast pace. I'll argue though, and then if they can get into it, but one of the things is, the reason why it's not going as fast is probably, again, and this is my sort of other piece, is that we probably could be more efficient at it. We put a lot of people in community colleges, and it doesn't matter sort of what their preparation is coming in, they don't do as well as if they go to a four-year school.
That's interesting.
And we haven't been growing the capacity in our four-year schools.
Is it because they're pre-selected?
Even if you adjust for that.
Yeah.
So we sort of looked at that good student
Right.
who, for whatever reason, chose community college over the four-year. Their even likelihood of getting the two-year associate degree is less.
Do we know why?
Everything from just sort of making that transition, the support that's probably available is probably a big part of it. The guidance that they get while they're there.
Does the four-year include those who start in a community college and finish?
No, we separate them out, although it's a real underutilized piece. And by the way, I can't tell you that. In the sort of whinge, PPIC, wherever we go, we complain about the absence or lack of access to data. And so you've just set me up for that whinge, and I apologize, but you invited me, so this is my privilege.
Thank you.
Our systems do not share. And so if a student does that, I can't take a look at their community college experience and match it to their CSU experience, or if they go to a UC. A lot of other states say, we have a higher ed system and we can follow them actually from kindergarten through out of the school, regardless of where they go, and even into the workforce.
So are you saying that we don't know?
We could only look at, when we did this chart, students in community colleges and what happened to them, and students who started in the four-year colleges and what happened to them.
So, okay.
It's just a
But it
blind
does
spot.
say that these are the people in community college that went on.
So-
Not included.
What I do know, and I can only do it by looking backwards, is that if I have someone in a UC or a CSU who I know transferred in, they look just like someone who went to there for the 4 years. And that's probably not surprising when you consider they were probably pretty motivated and had their act together.
So, but wait a minute, if you're looking at, say, the 42% of 4.0
Mhm.
GPA people who earned a bachelor's degree, you know that orange line, that they started they started.
Those were the ones that went straight to the community college,
But they
unless
had to have transferred to a four.
No,
No, no.
They graduated.
they graduated with like an associate degree or.
And they didn't go
They're
on.
not
Yeah.
talking
Wait,
about
but
that.
Well, no, they might have gone on
They
after
might
that,
have,
but we
but
just
they
know that
were
they
not. They weren't
completed.
It
included
says
in-
bachelor's degree though, over there.
No,
It should be a degree, sorry.
That's
Oh,
That's- that was
confusing
the- yeah.
about this.
Okay,
grant.
that was,
Yeah, you need to have completed what?
Completed,
Completed
should
the
be.
associate degree
Yeah.
and completed,
bachelor's.
completed doesn't do it just by itself.
So what it should say is not bachelor's degree, but degree.
Degree.
it could be associate degree.
So even if they had a 4.0, only 42% who entered that community college even got their associate
Yeah.
degree.
Yeah.
We need to know more about that, that's for sure.
Our great engine in the 4 year
So
schools.
could it be that some of those people didn't get the degree because they transferred after
Right.
1 year into a 4-year college?
Yeah.
And that number
Possibly.
is distorted?
And then they show up in the 4 year college.
Yes.
Yeah.
But they also would show up in the
But there is a sort of a 2 year transfer degree now. So ideally we would have seen them complete that.
Yeah.
but I don't know. I mean, I'm not gonna
Because I
sort of
transferred
say,
and I didn't get it. This was-
I can take every student that comes out and follow them through.
I wonder if there's a difference between those who start in a four-year college and go the 4 years and graduate, and those who start in a community college and transfer to a four-year college, because a lot of students do it for economical
Yep.
reasons.
And I guess my point is, I think from a strategic standpoint, it's a great path, but it's a tough jump to make, to actually get through there and not get off track and then make the jump. And quite surprisingly, only in a few places have we tried to make that easy. For example, UCLA has worked pretty closely with the LA district, community college district, to try to have some very specific articulation agreements. CSU Long Beach with Long Beach School District, as well as Long Beach Community College. If you want to sort of have the best shining example, Long Beach has some very interesting things going on. They've tried to make those a little bit easier and shown some success. But if you just sort of walk in the door at a community college, and you can have I think a good goal, but achieving that goal is more challenging.
I'm also wondering what would happen if you controlled for income on that, because.
That was all, we had done all low-income students on that one,
Oh,
you
okay.
know. Yeah, if we go with high income, it's,
Right, so yeah, I'm thinking it's the lower income students who go to the community
Yeah.
college, so
Right.
that
Yeah.
things are gonna be harder for them
Yeah.
all around.
these are 6-year completion rates at CSU. And the good story is we're up to just under half. So that means that for every 10 students that start 6 years later, 5 will have a degree.
6 years.
Is it?
6 years.
Takes 6 years.
And nothing takes 4.
The 4-year rate is,
Long gone.
I have another slide someplace.
Can't
but
get
it's,
the
it's below that blue line by quite a bit.
Yeah, they can't get the classes.
6 years
That's
for
crazy.
bachelor's.
That's
Okay.
crazy.
Yeah.
It didn't used to be that way, right?
It's been there for a long time.
Nationwide, their 6-year graduation rate is about where it is for some other comparable schools. The 4-year graduation rate is way below.
And
So
when did that change?
the rise up, or
No,
The 6
between the
year
4
takes-
years and the 6 years. When did it sort of become 6 years or 5 years?
I
Because
know
the
at least
standard
20
used to be
years ago,
4.
it was 6 years,
Yeah.
at least 20.
Really?
At University of California, they would try to promise you 4 years. But that basically, you'd have to go through the summer because you couldn't get courses
Yeah.
that you needed during the other, they filled up. But it's been, for the CSUs, 5 to 6 years has been a long time that's been
And
happening.
think of what that means for students.
Think
Of
what it
having
means
put
for
more and more money
the money.
in. That's
Oh,
right, more
right?
and more
I mean, the
money.
notion of it being a bargain changes a little bit,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
What I will say is, in both UCs do their 6-year rates, like at a Berkeley are up close to 90%. Berkeley, UCLA. System-wide, they're off the top of my head 80 some. They do very well. They do very much like, as it were, sort of flagships in other states and all that. The 4-year pretty well as well. But remember, our UCs are offering sort of services to half as many students. So this is why I look at the CSUs. It's like, there's 400,000. That's a potential 100,000 graduates if we were to do them every 4 years. But you can blame part of the institutions for not offering the classes and
Right.
having it available. And then to some degree it might be on the student side too.
Yeah, they work.
They work, they stop
Right.
for, a period either to take care of a family member or something like that. So it's hard to say what the policy should be. To the credit of the CSUs, that's not an accident, the 38 to 49. They've been working to do that. And Tim White has announced he wants to raise that even more. Some have said it's not ambitious enough. I'm like, hey, he's putting goals out there and they're going in the right direction. And I'm not going to discourage him from that.
Does it mean that the other
Lack of
51%
financial
don't finish?
We know they don't
Take
get anything.
longer?
Right. So they could finish in 10 years or whatever, but they just, when they go to follow up, they just stop at 6.
Okay.
You're gonna have to.
I think the trend started when there so much less financial aid became available. That was in the Reagan years, or because that's my impression, is that people
Although-
have to work their way still where it used to be, well, the fees were so much lower, and student aid was so much more available that you could really be a full-time student. And now I don't think that's very possible for a lot of.
Well, it's funny, I mean, I don't have the slides here, but for students making less than, we've looked back at least through the recession, students making, so when the fees really jumped, right? Students whose families make less than $70,000 a year were pretty much held harmless from that section, interestingly enough. Because the institutions, they raised tuition and then they took a chunk of that and gave it to the poorest kids. And I, again, sort of credit, I can give you lots of reasons why these systems haven't been doing some good things. That's a very good thing that they've done. And at least tried to mitigate some of that. But things like the Pell Grant didn't
Right.
keep pace with inflation. So if you're sitting there and and the piece I highlight is the fact that tuition is one thing, but then there's life.
Yeah.
And annoyingly, that costs something too.
Yeah.
And many kids don't live that close to a state university.
Well, and there's some pluses and
And they can't
minuses
live
too
there.
of doing it from home, because then it's easier to sort of stop for a while and you don't get back on because you have other sort of obligations and stuff. Whereas if you go on campus, it turns out that your chances of getting through are better, but that costs more and
A
all
lot
those good
more.
trade-offs.
You have to have another 15,000 for that per year.
It costs more and it delays their earning capacity.
Opportunity cost of not being there.
Mhm.
To not be sort of Dr. Doom here, I just want to give you an example of some folks who are thinking about this going back before, so this is a program that starts in middle school, that Sweetwater Union School District has started. That's what they looked like in terms of their high school graduates that went on to a four-year college. And if Sweetwater, if you want to look at the demographics, is a diverse, sort of pretty good reflection relative to the rest of the state or whatever. It's not representative, as it were, but I'm not cherry picking. This isn't Palo Alto High. So then they said, okay, let's start in middle school, and we will start talking to them about college, what they need to do in high school to do that, kind of to be thinking about that, what their options are, and even when they get into high school, giving them information about financial aid and all, because a lot of times they look at the price and they say, well, I can't afford that. They moved the needle. I mean, they had, went from about 16% to that drops back down to about 20%. Now, will these kids complete? We don't have enough time to see whether now that they're in college yet. But my point is that this isn't a mystery. Do you know what I mean? In terms of trying to figure out how we get more folks into college, and particularly from groups that haven't been represented as well. There's challenges both getting them to the door, though, and there's challenges of getting them to the right door, and then there's challenges of getting them through. So I'll end up where I started, that we've got this very powerful opportunity with education. I will argue that it requires a targeted, efficient and targeted K through 16 system. In other words, it's not just pouring resources into the top, but trying to figure out where, who, what needs to happen with them. We've made some, I think, very wise steps in terms of the way in which we distribute money. I'm, as I say, underwhelmed about how we're going to hold folks accountable for that. If we do all that, we could have better prepared high school graduates who could be in position to produce more college degrees. It would be nice if we had a plan for our higher ed system in California so we could figure out how we're going to accommodate all those brilliant high school graduates.
Oh, we have a master plan.
Yeah, and it's 50 years old.
Yes.
How many years
Use
old?
it
40
for how
years?
long yet?
50.
50 years old.
And I think there's inefficiencies in the system as well.
Well, so first of all, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
This was
Very.
really informative. I was as a kid pulled out of the public school system after kindergarten and in Los Angeles, and so kind of seeing all these things that my parents kind of bypassed is really, really helpful.
Now you'd go to a charter school.
Yeah, so now,
In
now
Los
they're
Angeles.
charter schools, yeah, they started right when I was a kid. And my question though, when it comes to unequal spending, I lived for 4 years in DC. They spend more per pupil than anywhere else in the whole country, and yet the schools are abysmal. The performance is horrible. you know, I mean, I saw here, you know, yes, you start talking to kids in middle school about going to college and you start seeing an increase, but how do you